On December 25th, 1952, famous mathematician Lancelot Hogben called upon the scientific community to send radio signals deep into the solar system. Hogben said he had no desire to visit Mars, but it might be a good idea to have a few chats with the Martians before sending rockets across space for a possible unfriendly reception. Hogben planned to send a simple code through a series of radio messages in the hope that extraterrestrials would receive and decode them, and then send some kind of response. Did extraterrestrials receive these signals? And did we get a response which has resulted in one of the biggest cover-ups in human history? March 4th, 1954. Over 3 years before the launch of the first man-made satellite Sputnik 1, the Los Angeles Times released an article suggesting that scientists had reason to believe that some small objects may be orbiting the Earth. Clyde Tombaugh, the discoverer of the planet Pluto, and Dr. Lincoln La Paz, an astronomer from the University of New Mexico and a pioneer in the study of meteors, were assigned to search for the orbiting bodies. 2 months later, Major Donald Keyhoe, the head of the biggest UFO research organization at the time called the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, announced in an interview that 1 or 2 artificial satellites in an unfamiliar retrograde orbit had been detected by Air Force radar at White Sands. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch and the San Francisco Examiner released stories about the detection. The reports contained a notice from Canadian government scientists asking any skywatchers to be especially alert and called for them to report any unidentified aerial objects that they had seen over the previous 2 weeks. Aviation Week broke the same story in August 1954. They confirmed Keyhoe's claim that there were 2 large objects orbiting the Earth, one at 400 miles and one at 600 miles above the Earth. They claimed that the objects were natural space rocks or asteroids, but scientists soon rejected the notion that Earth could capture natural objects that would take a retrograde orbit around the planet. In January 1960, the Dark Fence satellite surveillance system detected another anomalous object which this time was in polar orbit. The commanding officer of Dark Fence raced to the Pentagon and reported the menacing stranger to the Chief of Naval Operations, and within minutes the news was communicated to President Eisenhower and marked as top secret. 3 weeks after its discovery, it was made public and featured on the front page of many newspapers. The article stated that 2 months before this, Discoverer 8 had been fired into space and was still in orbit. But Navy trackers who keep a watch on all space objects said they knew the exact whereabouts of the Discoverer rocket casings, and that this object was definitely not one of them. At first it was thought that the object had been put there by the Russians. There was also some speculation that it was a stray British rocket from the Black Knight project. At the time, putting an object into a polar orbit and keeping it there was a feat that neither the British nor the Russians had been able to accomplish. But the object was soon dubbed the Black Knight, after the aforementioned British rocket. It took 1 whole month until Time magazine released an article offering the official explanation. And even though the Navy had previously stated that they knew the exact whereabouts of the Discoverer satellites and that the only one still orbiting was Discoverer 8, it contradictorily stated the evidence from both Air Force and Navy pointed to Discoverer 5, which was fired from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California in August 1959. In March 1960, a mysterious satellite was investigated by the CIA. The object was observed on March 6th by the crew of a Swedish Airlines plane. The captain's report stated that judging from all the circumstances, it was an unidentified satellite. It was very bright and moving in a northwesterly direction just after 8 p.m. He said without a doubt it was some form of satellite. The same object was also observed from the Stockholm Observatory. An employee said that it seemed to be a satellite, and that he was certain it wasn't a meteor. Both sightings were reported in the Swedish newspaper Today's News. The CIA report also talks of a so-called phantom satellite known as 1960 Alpha, which was also observed over Stockholm in Sweden on the same day. It was said to make a 90-degree turn before disappearing below the horizon. Another skywatcher was waiting to observe the phantom satellite at exactly the same time when he saw 2 objects which looked and moved like satellites make a 180-degree turn. In September 1960, reports of strange retrograde satellites were increasing and were causing quite a stir in the physics and astronomy community. Amateur astronomers from coast to coast and from Michigan to Missouri had reported seeing the objects. One object was said to appear at around the same time as the Echo 1 satellite, which was launched on August 12, 1960. Grumman Aircraft Corporation decided to set up a tracking station to capture a photograph of this mystery object, and on August 25, 1960, they were successful. This is the actual photograph taken by Grumman, and it's still the only confirmed photo of one of the mystery satellites available to the public. Grumman also confirmed that the object appeared around the same time as the Echo 1 satellite. They said that the color of the object varied from carrot to straw, and that the object was in a retrograde orbit traveling in an easterly to westerly direction. A few days before, on August 17th, this picture was taken in Bloomfield, Connecticut. It shows the Echo 1 satellite with an unknown object passing it on a strange orbit. In 1966, J. Allen Hynek from the Air Force's Project Blue Book wrote a long letter to Science magazine in which admitted the existence of unexplained UFO photos and radar tracking, and called for an end to the ridicule of reliable witnesses. He said Air Force reports included unexplained UFO photos, radar tracking, and unexplained pictures from Project Moonwatch and satellite tracking cameras. He also wrote about the existence of a photograph of a retrograde satellite taken 2 years before the Grumman photo. He said that the unidentified object's speed, as calculated at Chicago's Adler Planetarium, was 3 times that of any Earth-launched satellite. Unfortunately, Project Blue Book was shut down just 4 years after this, leaving the Air Force's study on the object incomplete. But one case of a retrograde satellite does remain in the Blue Book archives. The report states that an object was spotted in June 1963. The object was in orbit and traveling 1.5 times the speed of a regular satellite. Rose as to whether they were artificial or natural. John P. Bagby, who worked in the research division of the Hughes Aircraft Company, wrote some articles concerning these odd satellites. In 1966, he wrote an article for the Nature Journal stating that during the mid-50s he analyzed evidence of 2 swarms of such objects in retrograde orbits. He said that the brilliance of the objects to the naked eye caused most persons contacted to doubt that they were natural. He goes on to say that one of the objects had disappeared, and he thinks that it may have been a natural space rock which had decayed in the Earth's atmosphere during January 1966. So did it decay in Earth's atmosphere? Not according to Bagby's follow-up article, in which he states that he was able to optically observe the object in January 1967. He said that scientists had observed some strange radio anomalies, but they could not trace the origin. Bagby later analyzed the data and was able to correlate it with the orbit of the retrograde satellite. He also suggests that the objects have changed orbit. He discusses various possibilities. However, the analysis is inconclusive, and he thinks that further direct observations of the objects are needed to further determine their orbit. In 1981, Bagby clarifies that at least one retrograde satellite is still in orbit, and notes that a retrograde satellite had been spotted in orbit as early as 1880, when a group of retrograde bodies were seen orbiting over Germany. This was reported in the Nature Journal at the time. Despite all these observations, scientists remained adamant that the Earth would not be able to capture a natural satellite that would take a retrograde orbit around the planet. So after all of these observations, the question is still not settled. Could it be that these mysterious satellites are actually artificial, but scientists do not want to risk their reputation and say that there are one or more UFOs orbiting the planet? If you want to get an article published in a journal like Nature, you cannot say that Earth is being orbited by UFOs. To the readers of Nature and the general public, a natural satellite sounds more probable, and yet science does not accept the latter as fact. So what is going on? And is there any evidence of a cover-up? In 1961, computer scientist Jacques Vallée and his team were working at the Paris Observatory tracking satellites. They started tracking unusual objects that were not man-made satellites. The objects were quite elusive, but the team decided that they would pay close attention to the objects, even though they were not on the schedule of normal satellites. One night they were able to get 11 data points for one of the objects. They found that it was in a retrograde orbit, and noted that it was very bright and prominent. That same night, the person in charge of the project confiscated the tape, and the next morning he erased it through fear of ridicule. These events contributed to Vallée's long-standing interest in the UFO phenomenon. In an interview, Vallée stated that other observatories had made exactly the same observation, and that there was a lot of data that was never published. Adler Planetarium director Robert L. Johnson and his colleague Frank Judson had been studying a mysterious orbiting object which would intermittently appear. Speaking in a Newsday interview in 1960, they both positively stated that the object was not an artificial satellite or space rock. Judson said the object didn't maintain a regular schedule like other orbiting bodies, and that it appeared some nights, and some nights it didn't. They also confirmed that when it did appear, it was usually at about the same time as Echo 1, but going in the opposite direction and about twice as fast. The object was orbiting the planet at an incredible speed, and it remained unidentified. But when Judson was asked the inevitable question, he said he doesn't know what the strange object is, but he doesn't believe in UFOs. Finally, in 1954, Captain Howard T. Orville, head of the President's Weather Control Commission at the White House, was questioned on WFBR radio by Lou Corbin, who served in the U.S. Army Intelligence Corps during World War II. He was asked if he knew of any condition under which two objects could enter the Earth's atmosphere and pick up orbiting at 400 and 600 miles out. To which he replied, "Not that I know of. Your doubts are well justified." Mr. Corbin then asked if the two bodies might be space stations. Captain Orville replied, "Well, that is an interesting thought. I don't know of any set of circumstances that would account for two natural objects orbiting around the Earth." During a broadcast with the same station 3 years later, Captain Orville said that he held the same ideas on unknown satellites orbiting the Earth as he had previously expressed. When asked if there was any new information about the unknown satellites, Captain Orville said that it appeared that the military might have kept the matter from publication. "From the American people?" asked Mr. Corbin. In reply, Captain Orville said he did not wish to call it a deliberate cover-up. He then added, "But we didn't hear any more about it, did we?" So there we have it. Evidence of a cover-up, and the answer to why scientists do not accept that the Earth could capture natural satellites in a retrograde or polar orbit. Because whatever these things are, there is an enormous amount of evidence which suggests that they are not natural. They didn't maintain a regular orbit. They appear and disappear, and have an odd color. They also change direction and reflect radio signals, which is impossible for natural objects. In more recent years, we have multiple UFO reports from astronauts and numerous videos of various space shuttles being tracked by UFOs whilst in orbit, adding to the evidence that the Earth is being visited. Maybe Lancelot Hoban's radio signals did prompt these strange satellites to appear in orbit around the Earth, or maybe they have always been here. The true origins of these mysterious objects may never be known.
Black Knight satellite. It's claimed to be over 13,000 years old. It was discovered in 1954, and it's apparently the reason that we started the space race in the first place. So why has nobody seen it? Well, they claim it's in a polar orbit, and here we see an example of a polar orbit. But even in this type of orbit, somebody would have to be able to see this, guys, at some point in time. So why aren't we? It's because we're not looking for it. We rely on images from NASA and all of these government agencies, such as this video right here that I found. Is it legit video? Is it hoax video? I can't tell you either way, guys. I've seen so much stuff in the last year that it's so hard to tell. But when we look at this video right here, we can see the claim of this object being a seat is false. Look at the size. Look at the relationship in size as the shuttle passes over the Black Knight satellite, or what's claimed to be the Black Knight satellite. That's a pretty decent sized object right there, guys. So why is nobody talking about this? Why do we never hear anything about this? Well, we have a lot of people out there that report on it. A lot of people talk about it, but we really don't have facts on it, guys. That's what we need. We need a campaign where we have astronomers out there with telescopes, We need them looking in the skies. We need to find things like this. They're very easy to match up, guys. When we find a satellite through the telescope, we can match that up really easy. We know what should be there. We know what shouldn't be there. We need a very serious observing campaign to try and find this thing. Although it is in polar orbit, it is visible, guys. It will make its way over land and people will be able to see it. So, where do we go from here? It's simple. We get out there and we start looking. We stop relying on NASA. We stop relying on the European Space Agency. We stop relying on the Chinese Space Agency and the Russian Space Agency. And we start relying on ourselves. With the technology we have out there that's available to us, guys, we're perfectly capable of making observations such as this and doing searches like this from here on Earth with absolutely no problem. Like I said, it's not hard to match up a satellite in orbit. We got all the specs, we know where they should be, and we know where things shouldn't be. So why aren't we out there doing it? It's because we're getting lazy, guys. We come on YouTube, we go to NASA, we go to JPL, we punch in a couple letters on the keyboard and we get the information that we're looking for, or the information that we think that we're looking for. It's always altered, and it sucks. And it's never accurate, guys. The only accurate information we're going to get is from ourselves. Now, we see all these videos from NASA. We know about the UFOs that they constantly capture up there. Everybody's on board with this. You know, we all say, oh yes, NASA captured UFOs, NASA did this, and look at what they have. But then when it comes down to the Black Knight satellite, there's so much denial going on with it. How is it that NASA can capture UFOs on video and you agree with that during an STS mission, but we give you some video or we give you some high resolution that comes straight from the NASA websites of this object, and people go into denial mode? No, it's fake. Well, here's an image that I put as a comparison from what I think that I've caught around the SOHO satellites. This object bounces around. This is the rumor. One day it's here, another day it's there. We don't know, guys. We really don't know, and that's the whole point. We don't know, but we want to know.
Welcome back to UFO Planet. I better try that again. Welcome back to UFO Planet. Now we're going to head right into our interview with Bob Figuera. A few weeks ago, I gave Bob an assignment to do some research on the Black Knight satellite. There was a lot of questions and a lot of requests coming in to have something on the program about that. So Bob went out and he looked for pretty much everything that was out there, read through it, studied it, and then I interviewed him about it so that he could share that information with the rest of us. So let's get that interview started right now. We're here again with Bob Figuera. Bob is joining us from Brook Trails, California, in the United States of America. And Bob was on special assignment for UFO Planet. He was sent out to find out as much information as he could about the Black Knight satellite that is allegedly orbiting Earth. Welcome to the program again, Bob.
Hey, thanks, Darren, man. It's nice to be here.
Well, it's nice to have you. So, Bob, you had a pretty tough assignment on your hands there. There was a lot of information to sift through, I can imagine. So, kind of give me a synopsis of what you found there.
Okay. The whole Black Knight thing is, mysterious satellites that's been orbiting the moon and the Earth, and a bunch of different opinions on what it is, where it came from, and how it got here, and why, and all that stuff. And it's gone a lot of different directions.
Okay, let's just start off here with the basics first. Apparently there are those who are saying that there is this gigantic satellite that has been labeled the Black Knight satellite that is orbiting the Earth, and some say it's been orbiting the Earth for 13,000 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, some say 13, some say 15,000. It all started in 1899 with Nikola Tesla,
Okay.
technology man of the century, and I guess he got the first message, but he wasn't able to decipher it or didn't have the technology to really figure out where it came from.
Okay.
So in 1920, a bunch of college ham operators, like a group of ham operators, they received the first message. They weren't able to do anything with it either. The technology wasn't there.
Okay.
It wasn't until like 1927 or 28 where they actually got their echo radio transmission technology down, where they could actually triangulate a position of an origin of a signal.
Okay, and that wasn't done by the college students, so that was done by military officials, is that correct?
It was basically a Norwegian professor of mathematics in the University of Oslo.
Oh, okay.
And then one other guy, chief consultant from the Naval Operations Center. They all got together with their technology, combined their technology and information. They were able to ascertain the distance that this thing was based on the echo time delay.
What kind of distance did they find it was sitting out at?
Originally, they said it was 6,200 miles, something like that.
Okay.
It was out there a ways.
Okay. Now, also, carry on there. Now, when did the Soviets come into the picture?
Well, that would be 1957 where they first launched Sputnik 1. They actually saw this thing in polar orbit on the moon, around the moon.
Okay.
And it was it was a difficult target. They could never rely on it because they didn't understand the nature of its orbit.
Okay.
So they didn't know where to be, where to look for it, because it was always changing.
Okay, now then we move on. So that's the Soviets seeing it with Sputnik. And then we move ahead a little bit, not too much, and apparently some sort of a satellite that we had up, or the Americans had up at that time, was able to capture some of the first photographs of the satellite orbiting Earth this time.
Yeah. From what I understand is that the information they got from the Soviets gave them the intention for their Discovery 5 mission.
Okay.
And so they launched it out from Vandenberg Air Force Base here in California in 1959.
Okay.
And their intention was to go film this thing. Apparently, Grumman had some contact or some technology that was in one of those satellites, the early satellites, and they actually got the first photos of it.
Okay. Now, is it true that this is kind of what the time in history when kind of the flow of information stopped about the Black Knight satellite? We all of a sudden didn't hear a whole lot about it anymore. Is that correct?
Well, that was just the real early stages where they were actually just starting to get some real information about it. Because they built it, they had a new program. The Defense Department had a new program called Dark Fence. And it was a tripwire radar that went from Alabama to Arizona with these 50 meter wide transmission receivers, whatever.
Okay.
And so they actually got 2 sightings up the first day it was running, and then they'd gotten several more in the upcoming days. So that's where the real interest started with the government. And then in like 1960, the commander of that project went to the Pentagon and talked with some commander there, and they all got excited, and they went running to Eisenhower, and they all labeled it as top secret.
Okay, so that's where the flow of information comes to a cease then.
Not really. It changed orbit from the moon to Earth in 1960, and they thought it was a new satellite. But apparently, somehow, either their first assumptions were wrong and it was actually been in polar orbit, so the Soviets didn't know this, and they thought it was a new satellite. But apparently it had been going around the Earth above them, because when their orbit was at 200 miles, this thing was way above them.
Right.
And they could only see it when it was out in front of them because it was always over their head.
Okay.
Right.
So that led to some confusion then at the time.
Yeah. Well, all this stuff was all brand new to them and stuff.
Oh, and, absolutely.
So.
Now, how do we advance up? Sorry, go ahead.
It wasn't until like '73 with this writer. He was an astronomer, a writer, Scottish guy, Duncan Lunan. He was the guy who was able to take this radio signal and decipher it.
Okay.
And that was pretty interesting because that was the first indication that we had what the intent of this satellite was. And it was simply stated, it says that our home is Epsilon Bootes, which is a double star. We live on the sixth planet of 7, counting outwards from the sun, which is the larger of the 2 suns. Our sixth planet was 1 moon. Our fourth planet has 3 moons. First planet has 3. The first and third planets each have 1 moon. And they say our probe is orbiting your moon.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then it gives an update to this constellation.
Okay, so just so I understand it correctly and the viewers understand it correctly, this scientist deciphered the message that was being transmitted by this satellite, and that's what he said. That's what he speculated that it said.
I'm not sure how much speculation, how much technology was, created that message. He was a writer. Mm-hmm. So he kind of got...
There might have been some Hollywoodization of that. Is that what you're saying, potentially?
Possible, but, up to that point, there was no speculation as to why this thing was here. I mean, and it was only in calculating... He had a good enough data where he could calculate the position of the stars in that constellation and determine that that's the way that constellation looked like 13,000 years ago versus the way it looks like today.
Oh, very interesting. So that's why there is the speculation that that's about the time that the satellite was sent.
Right.
Oh, it all adds together there.
Yeah, so now people are wondering, okay, well, if they put it up there 13,000 years ago, why would they do that? And many people have made speculations as to why, and I've read all the reports and stuff, and the way I see it, there's only 3 possible explanations. Okay. And that is that, the Black Knight was put over our planet because they had to leave our planet. And they wanted to leave a historical record of why they were there, why it was left there, and where they went. Okay.
Interesting. Okay. Second.
So, the second would be the development since we understand the time-space continuum thing, right? Mm-hmm. And that this is just simply a time capsule that was placed there by those off-worlders who actually live on that planet Bootes in the Epsilon constellation.
Okay. And number 3?
Well, that would be that there was some new discoveries recently, and now this is on me, okay? I'm going to take responsibility for this because I came across some information that says that as our planet is changing, a global planet and the global warming is changing the Siberian tundra to the point where now that the researchers can actually get deeper into Mother Earth and, because it's like a layer of trees. The deeper you go, the further back in history you go.
Yes. And
they discovered now that these new findings that they're having from the mammoths have yielded extremely high particulate levels of radiation. And it's a type of radiation that we've never created on this planet. And they're finding this in the layers. They're finding this in the layers where these remnants of the mammoths are at right now. So one could conclude that if there was enough radiation to kill the mammoths, then what would it have done to the inhabitants of this planet? assuming that they were maybe advanced beings who came here from some other world and they settled here. And interestingly enough, the last report that I know of about the galactic wars between the humans who took this planet over versus those reptilian beings, they had this big war. And what better way to knock somebody off the planet than to contaminate it? And they were low-dimensional beings.
Interesting speculation there, Bob.
So, I don't know. It could be any one of those three, you know.
Well, one thing for sure, it's very interesting, and we've been fortunate in that we have more technology up in space, and we've been able to see some more recent photographs that were taken from the shuttle missions, and which prove that something's up there. Would you believe that, Bob? Do you think that the Black Knight satellite is truly orbiting the Earth? One word, yes or no?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And they still think it's up there, but it's in some kind of a strange orbit, and they don't always see it, or they're just stepping on it. You know, they believed it because they got the pictures of it that they took from the space shuttle, and they declassified it from top secret, you know, to public domain or whatever, and everybody was already tired of the story. But then when the interest redeveloped, they pulled all the photos off their NASA website of January this year. I don't know, out of
very
fear,
interesting.
So
I think when they do things like that, it causes more speculation than anything. It causes more interest to rekindle itself. But we're running out of time here today, Bob. I just want to thank you for doing such an impeccable job on researching the Black Knight satellite. I'm sure we'll be hearing more about that in the future, but we certainly appreciate what you've brought to the table here for us today.
Well, thank you. You know, thanks for the assignment. It was a very interesting assignment. I was glad to be able to spend some time doing it.
Well, you did a great job, and I look forward to your next one. And until then, thanks so much, and you take care, Bob.
Thank you, Darren.
Well, NASA has cleared the shuttle Atlantis for landing tomorrow morning, I think about 6:41, despite astronauts spotting 3 new pieces of debris floating in space.
This is one day after the discovery of 2 other mysterious objects. Kim McIntyre is down at Johnson Space Center.
Pieces of debris floating around close to the shuttle today. NASA wanted to make sure the shuttle was intact and ready to withstand the long and dangerous journey back home. NASA says nothing stood out and was not out of place during the 4.5-hour inspection of the shuttle, but mission managers did an additional survey of the shuttle's protective heat shield anyway. The surveys were initially sparked by a mysterious object floating under the spacecraft yesterday. It was detected shortly after a routine check of the shuttle's steering jets. Now, since Columbia, NASA developed several tools and procedures to safeguard the shuttle while in space. NASA admits they may never know exactly what the unknown objects are, but confirms the shuttle is ready to handle the 3,000-degree temperatures it will meet as it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere.
Over the years, we have chased many of these things, maybe not with the visibility that this one has gotten, and rarely, if ever, been able to pinpoint exactly where they came from, and always finding out that it didn't pose us any hazard.
35,000 miles an hour could cause serious damage to the shuttle.
So what could these things possibly be? I mean, a lot of people are writing in saying satellites.
Pieces off
could
satellites?
They be satellites? Pieces of satellites?
Well, they're unlikely to be off a satellite because the fact that they're in the same orbit as the shuttle. They're floating along with the orbital. So more than likely it's something that was maybe dropped in the payload bay during the servicing of the shuttle, and during the thruster firings and the flight control checks yesterday, they floated up out of the bay and just started falling off.
But I don't recall seeing this in recent missions. Is this something that happens frequently and it's just not reported?
Occasionally. On my second mission.
In the blackness of space, orbiting around the Earth, is a mysterious, dark object of unknown, and possibly alien origin. The story says it's up there right now, and has been for 13,000 years. Its purpose unknown. Dubbed the Black Knight. This elusive satellite has allegedly been beaming signals towards the Earth for many years. Nikola Tesla was a brilliant Serbian inventor who spent most of his career in the USA. He was an electrical engineer and produced works which explored the idea of radio and wireless transmissions. In 1899, Nikola Tesla, with the aid of his financial backer, J.P. Morgan, set up at Colorado Springs an experimental laboratory containing high-voltage radio transmission equipment. The lab had a 200-foot tower for transmission and reception of radio waves and the best receiving equipment available at the time. One night, when he was alone in the laboratory, Tesla observed what he cautiously referred to as electrical actions which definitely appeared to be intelligent signals. The changes were taking place periodically, and with such a clear suggestion of number and order that they could not be traced to any cause then known to him. Instead, he announced that regular signals must be coming from an intelligent outside source.
Undaunted, Tesla continued his wireless power experiments for 6 more months. Late one night, an unusual event took place. Tesla noticed a repeating signal being received by his apparatus. To his own amazement, he believed it was an extraterrestrial communication. In a letter to the American Red Cross, he wrote,
"Brothers, we have a message from another world. It reads, 1, 2, 3.
The press had a field day.
If the mystical 1, 2, 3 was impulsed from Mars, as Tesla says, they certainly showed most excellent taste in choosing Colorado Springs. It is a rule in inventional science. When you're going to tell one, tell a good one. And men have become great in this way. Colorado Springs Gazette.
Though widely ridiculed for his claim, Tesla may have been the first to detect radio waves from space.
I believe that Tesla could have gotten these signals from space. We are getting them today, and these are the radio telescopes. That's what radio telescopes do today, receive signals from space.
At the conference, Tesla announced that he was receiving an electrical signal which appears to be intelligent. The signal was clearly repeated periodically with such a clear suggestion of number and order. This led him to believe that the signal was extraterrestrial communication with aliens. At first he assumed they were originating from Mars.
If in a thunderstorm, the Earth is struck by lightning, the force creates concentric waves which slowly expand to circle the world until they come back to where they started. This proves to us that the Earth's crust is a conductor of electrical energy. Now, if we were to produce large quantities of electrical energy and if we directed it into the Earth's crust, then that energy would travel in concentric waves.
There were rumors you went to Colorado Springs in order to contact Mars, is that true?
It is possible for us to send out waves which can travel around the world. There are waves as well which can travel into space.
How are you going to talk with them?
I never intended to. However, I recorded certain electrical impulses of unknown origin, and these were repeated at constantly timed intervals. It's possible they were a kind of signal from space.
And did you in turn send them a message?
Ask the Martians that question.
But you did send some sort of signal.
A signal which might not be received for 1,000,000 years.
Therefore, Mr. Tesla, you do believe communication with distant worlds may someday be possible.
Perhaps they've been sending us messages for ages, but we aren't aware of it.
Mr. Tesla, what's that big pile of papers down there on the floor?
My file on the work in Colorado Springs.
Can you tell us what's in it?
It's a new electrical system.
This incident was the first of many in which Tesla intercepted what he felt were intelligent signals from space. At the time, it was surmised by prominent scientists that Mars would be a likely haven for intelligent life in our solar system, and Tesla at first thought these signals may be originating from the Mars. He would later change this viewpoint as he became more adept at translating the mysterious signals. Near the end of his life, Tesla had developed several inventions that allegedly could send powerful amounts of energy to other planets. By 1920, Tesla had grown confident that he was able to make sense of the strange radio broadcasts from space. However, soon afterwards, Tesla began to express great concerns about beings from other planets who had unsavory designs for planet Earth. The signals are too strong to have traveled the great distances from Mars to Earth, wrote Tesla. So I am forced to admit to myself that the sources must come from somewhere in nearby space or even the moon. I am certain, however, that the creatures that communicate with each other every night are not from Mars, or possibly from any other planet in our solar system. Today, there are those who believe Nikola Tesla was listening to a transmission from an orbiting satellite of unknown origin. Could the transmissions be coming from the Black Knight satellite? Guglielmo Marconi, an Italian inventor and electrical engineer, known for his pioneering work on long-distance radio transmissions, picked up strange radio messages from space. In London, January 28, 1920. In an interview granted to an editor of Daily Mail, Guglielmo Marconi asserts that the radio telegraph stations often receive radio signals of which nobody until now, it is successful to discover the origin. They are signals surely sent from great distance, and outside of the terrestrial atmospheric zone, because they are at the same time picked up by distant radio telegraph stations, like London or New York. It has not been possible, Guglielmo Marconi says, to decipher some comprehensible message even if it uses a kind of Morse alphabet that are repeated many times. Marconi says that the scientific investigations over the origin of the signals are continuing and that it cannot give some reliable explanation of the phenomenon, but not exclude that these radio signals can come from other planets or from the sun. The Daily Mail closes the interview to Marconi and it wonders if we do not find ourselves already at the best of the greatest discovery that mankind can make, to enter in communication with people of other planets. Also, in the 1920s, amateur ham radio operators around the world were able to receive this same signal.
He cautions that a few reports cannot be so easily explained. It is these reports that interest Donald Kehoe, sponsor of a theory that is growing in popularity.
After 1 year's investigation, I believe that the flying saucers seen by veteran airline and Air Force pilots are objects from another planet. The Air Force itself has officially admitted that flying saucers exist. This statement appears in Project Saucer Case number 75. Not only that, the Air Force has officially analyzed the motives of possible visitors from space. Here is a direct quotation from the official report. Such a civilization might observe that on Earth we now have atomic bombs and are fast developing rockets. In the past history of mankind, they should be alarmed. We should therefore expect at this time above all to behold such visitations.
Donald Edward Kehoe was an American Marine Corps naval aviator, and writer of many aviation articles and stories in a variety of leading publications, and manager of the promotional tours of aviation pioneers, especially of Charles Lindbergh. In the 1950s, he became well known as a UFO researcher, arguing that the United States government should conduct appropriate research in UFO matters, and should release all its UFO files. On Friday, May 14, 1954, numerous newspapers, including the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and the San Francisco Examiner, reported an interesting statement by retired Marine Corps Major Donald E. Kehoe, who states the Earth is being circled by one or two unknown artificial satellites. The United States government scientists at the White Sands National Monument, he added, were making an effort to locate, chart them, and determine their origin. At the time, neither the Americans or the Soviet Union had the ability to place a man-made object into orbit. On August 23, 1954, Aviation Week magazine ran a story on two satellites that had been found at 400 and 600 miles out in space. They were termed natural satellites, even though this was later deemed a virtual impossibility, and later no such natural satellites were ever claimed. This is taken from the short Aviation Week article. The Pentagon's scare over the observance of two previously unobserved satellites orbiting the Earth has dissipated with the identification of the objects as natural, not artificial satellites. Dr. Lincoln La Paz, expert on extraterrestrial bodies from the University of New Mexico, headed the identification project. One satellite is orbiting about 400 miles out, while the other track is 600 miles from the Earth. The Pentagon thought momentarily the Russians had beaten the United States to space explorations.
CBS Television presents a special report on Sputnik 1, the Soviet space satellite. Douglas Edwards reporting.
Until 2 days ago, that sound had never been heard on this Earth. Suddenly, it has become as much a part of 20th century life as the whir of your vacuum cleaner. It's a report from man's farthest frontier, the radio signal transmitted by the Soviet Sputnik, the first man-made satellite as it passed over New York earlier today.
In 1953, 4 years before the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1 into space, an object of unknown origin, orbiting the Earth, was sighted by Dr. Lincoln La Paz of the University of New Mexico. Lincoln La Paz was an American astronomer from the University of New Mexico, and a pioneer in the study of meteors. As more and more reports of unknown satellite sightings trickled in from around the world, the United States Department of Defense appointed distinguished astronomer Clyde W. Tombaugh, best known for his discovery of the dwarf planet Pluto in 1930, to run a search for the mystery object. The mysterious object later became known as Black Knight. The Pentagon never formally released the results of Dr. Tombaugh's study. In 1960, the Black Knight makes another appearance when American newspapers report on an unusual object in polar orbit. By the 1960s, both superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, had artificial satellites in near equatorial orbit. By comparison, the unknown object was in polar orbit. That meant the satellite could see every part of the Earth. Neither country admitted to owning it. Polar orbits are often used for Earth mapping, Earth observation, capturing the Earth as time passes from one point, and reconnaissance satellites. This would put the Black Knight in the category of an observational satellite. Astronomers and scientists observing the object calculated its weight to be over 10 tons, which would be at that time the heaviest artificial satellite to orbit our planet. The Black Knight's orbit was unlike any other object orbiting Earth. This is what Robert L. Johnson, director of the Adler Planetarium, had to say about the object. The object, Judson said, doesn't even have the decency to maintain a regular schedule, like any other heavenly or man-made object he's ever seen. We don't know when to watch for it. He says. It appears some nights, and some nights it doesn't. On September 3, 1960, 7 months after the satellite was first detected by radar, it was revealed that an unidentified object had been photographed in the sky over New York by a tracking camera at the Grumman Aircraft Corporation's Long Island factory. The object, which appeared to emanate a red glow, had been seen several times during the preceding 2 weeks, apparently following an east-to-west orbit, whereas most satellites were launched in the opposite direction. The United States government attached so much importance to these mysterious sightings that they organized a special committee to gather as much information as possible about them. But the committee's findings, if there were any, were kept secret, and the sightings were forgotten. On January 31st, Dark Fence, a Air Force space surveillance system, detected 2 passes of what seemed to be an unknown space object. After detecting several passes during the following days, Captain W. E. Berg, commanding officer of Dark Fence, decided that something was circling overhead on a roughly polar orbit. He raced to the Pentagon and in person reported the strange satellite to Chief of Naval Operations Arleigh Burke. Within minutes the news was communicated to President Eisenhower and marked top secret. In the confusion, there was a delay before anyone took the step necessary to positively identify the strange satellite, informing the Air Force's newly established Surveillance Center in Bedford, Mass. It is the Surveillance Center's job to take all observations on satellites from all friendly observing centers, both optical and electronic, feed them into computers to produce figures that will identify each satellite, describe its orbit and predict its behavior. Says one top official, explaining the cold facts of the space age. The only way of knowing that a new satellite has appeared is by keeping track of the old ones. Gordon Cooper was an American aerospace engineer, test pilot, United States Air Force pilot, and one of the 7 original astronauts in Project Mercury, the first manned space program of the United States. Cooper piloted the longest and final Mercury space flight in 1963. He was the first American to sleep in space during the 34-hour mission and was the last American to be launched alone to conduct an entirely solo orbital mission. On May 15, 1963, Gordon Cooper was launched into space for a 22-orbit mission. On his final orbit, he reported seeing a glowing green shape ahead of his capsule, and heading in his direction. It is said that the Muchia tracking station, in Australia, which Cooper reported this to, was also able to pick it up on radar traveling in an east-to-west orbit. This event was reported by NBC, but reporters were forbidden to ask Cooper about the event on his landing. The official explanation is that an electrical malfunction in the capsule had caused high levels of carbon dioxide, which induced hallucinations. These are the transcripts from the mission. 5:05 and 3 seconds. Have been looking for the flashing beacon. This light's in sight. It is below me. It is quite a brownish, reddish-brown, and considerable altitude above the ground. Every time I fire a pitch-down thruster, I get a shower of these little fireflies. The light is flashing now. It's quite bright, quite discernible. It appears to be about 10 to 12 miles away, about the order of a second magnitude star. In the following years, Gordon Cooper makes several public pronouncements concerning his strong belief in the existence of UFOs.
And it trailed along with him for quite a period of time, then tipped up and climbed very steeply away. Was on Jim McDivitt's Gemini 7 mission, where they saw this glint of something metallic off in the distance. And he reported, and nobody had it listed on the ground, so he tried getting a picture of it, but the sun, unfortunately, was glinting off of it so bright, all you got is just a glint. There was no detail on what it was, but never any further sighting at all on it.
Years later, Cooper approached the United Nations with a proposal for a committee that would explore the UFO phenomenon.
All right, now tell me about the letter to the UN.
Well, the letter to the UN was in conjunction with a meeting that I had with Kurt Waldheim and the Security Council of the UN to try to encourage the UN to establish a committee to start comparing notes and data and information and to really look into all of this from an unbiased, neutral point of view.
Here's a quote from your letter. I believe that these extraterrestrial vehicles and their crews are visiting this planet from other planets and are obviously a little more advanced than we are here on Earth. And are you saying that's exactly why governments have been trying to keep this information private, because of that obvious advancement?
Very possibly, right.
1973, in an article in Spaceflight, the magazine of the British Interplanetary Society, Duncan Lunan, an astronomer and science fiction author, said he had identified and deciphered a hidden radio message sent by an alien space probe that had been caught, but overlooked in the late 1920s by a collaboration of Norwegian and Dutch researchers who were studying the long-delayed echo effect. Published along with an accompanying editorial disclaimer, Lunan maintained that the putative message came from an object at the L5 point in the same orbit as the Moon, sent by the inhabitants of a planet orbiting Epsilon Bootis. Duncan Lunan, who had conducted this research, believed the alien satellite had been in orbit in the solar system for over 12,000 years. He believed its purpose was to intercept and return signals at delayed intervals so that eventually scientists on Earth would realize what was happening. Writing in 1973, Lunan believed the decoded intervals also gave out the following information: our home sun is Epsilon Bootis. It is a double star. We live on the 6th or 7th planet, counted from the sun, which is the larger of the two. Our 6th planet has 1 moon, our 4th planet has 3, and our 1st and 3rd planets 1 each. Our satellite is in orbit around your moon. The claim was reported in Time and the CBS Evening News.
start, Endeavour's onboard computers have primary control of all the vehicle's critical functions. T-minus 20 seconds.
15.
T-minus 13 seconds.
10.
9, 8, 7, 6. We have a go. Main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1. We have booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour, continuing the union of U.S. and Russian space endeavors.
(1998). The crew of the Space Shuttle Orbiter Endeavour photographed an unusual object in low Earth orbit. When the Space Shuttle Endeavour made its first flight to the International Space Station on flight STS-88, astronauts aboard the Endeavour took many photographs of this strange object. The photographs were made widely available to the public on the NASA website. But soon, the photographs all disappeared. They reappeared sometime later, with new URLs, and with various descriptions explaining them all away as pieces of debris or space junk. The photographs were of high quality and unmistakably showed some type of craft. These are the photographs taken by the Endeavour. On October 7, 2014, Expedition 41 flight engineers conducted a spacewalk outside the International Space Station to relocate a failed cooling pump and to install a power cable device designed to provide backup electrical capability to the station's rail car system. In the background, beneath the astronauts, suddenly, a mysterious craft appears, and hovers for a few seconds. This event was captured on NASA's live camera feed. Could this mysterious craft, hovering in the background, be the Black Knight satellite?